Chapter 3. This is Jimmy Soper. This is him coming up the path now in his reach-me-down suit, the bum freezer coat, and the narrow tubed pants, and the hair like an oil pot. And that used to come up the same path, with knees like door knockers. This is the same Jimmy Soper that picked his nose and ate it, the filthy little beast, said his mother that pinched a nip of his old man's plank on the quiet, that slept with his 3 sisters and his 3 brothers in one room, cramped in one room, and cramped in 2 beds, and cramped with his sisters. This is him with the little butt in his mouth, and the shifty swivel of an eye, and the glossy dancing pumps on his feet. Jimmy Soper, the girl crank, the big feller, the pride of himself, the show-off that pinched his mother's maternity nightgown and went to the fancy dress ball as young Dr. Kildare, and ended up vomiting and zigzagging his way home, still in maternity nightgown, that billowed like a cloud all over the footpath. This is Jimmy Soper, now knocking at the door with that sly tap of his that makes for courtesy, and it is him that says, "Hello, Miss Costello, Dano home." "Come in, Jimmy, Dano's having a wash. He shouldn't be long." She went out into the kitchen to finish the wiping up. "Sit down, Jimmy. Hell, they don't say sit down in this dump. You got to plant your own bronze on something." "That's right. Leave you on your own." The old woman in the kitchen, the old man God knows where. Sit down and hold your hands and spot the fly-blown pictures. Look at the wall, look at the ceiling. Why don't she come and talk, say what's doing with you, how are things? No, keep away as though you've got cat crap on your boots. A great place to come to, by God. She don't like you, that's it, and just as well the old bird ain't here too, making you feel uncomfortable, picking at you with questions and showing you up, and that stuck-up pious Pete of a Johnny. Dano came in, face glowing like a polished apple, striped to the waist, rubbing behind his neck with the towel. "You're early. I thought I'd come up. How's Reg? Is he coming with us?" "No. Why?" The mug said he was. Jimmy Soper lowered his voice and cast his shifty eyes around against the entrance and earshot of the old woman. "He's got hold of a potater. He'll see us later." "Any good?" Dano whispered. "Who?" "The Sheila." Jimmy stood up excitedly. "Any good? Boy, Dano, she had everything. The best pair of—" "Shut up, will ya?" Dano cut him severely. "You want her to hear? Use your nut." Jimmy Soper nodded and sat back on the tattered sofa. Dano went into his room. He put on his navy blue suit, white shirt and blue tie with the white polka dots. He smoothed his hair until it lay back like a belt of glossy licorice. "You'll do," Johnny grinned from the bed where he was reading. "You bet I'll do," Dano told him, without smiling, fixing the knot of his tie. "How's the dancing coming on? Still tripping over your big feet?" "I'm not much yet," Dano said, "but I can run rings round you." There was a prick of acid in his voice, and Johnny left off the joking. He went back to his book. Dano was so pleased with his appearance that he had to ask Johnny how he looked. Johnny said he looked like a kid with £1,000,000 for a father. "See you later," Dano said. In the kitchen his mother was talking in a disinclined way to Jimmy Soper. She stood back and genuinely admired her son. "My, you do look nice, Dano. Now you won't be late home, will you? I hope you enjoy yourselves." She made to give Dano a kiss, but he swerved his face and his cheek brushed her lips. He didn't see the momentary hurt look in her eyes. He said, "Come on, goodbye, Mom," and they went. The lights were on in the school hall, but only a few of the boys and girls had turned up, and they were sitting inside on the forms around the wall, chatting. Jimmy and Dano put their heads in the door and thought they'd wait a while. Jimmy said he had some smokes, and he and Dano went over in a dark corner and became two glowing red points. They smelt the weed on your breath yet. If they did, they haven't said anything, Dano said. The old man caught me the other night, but he didn't go crooked. He said, "Give us one, so I'm right." Why do I care if they find out at home? I don't care. To hell with them. You know Bonnie Westgate, how he tries to scrape the stain off his fingers with a razor blade. Yeah, he was doing it the other day, and he cut the top off his thumb. He's a big lame brain. Listen, you didn't tell me where Reggie got this sword. He just picked her up last night over at Menley. I was with him, and you should have seen the drip I got. Couldn't talk properly. Bought her a hamburger, and the silly bastard nearly choked. We had to hammer on her back. Did you do any good? No, Reggie's Sheila had to get home by 10, and we didn't pick him up till about 9. I left him and took this bonehead with me, but she wouldn't come across. Gee, rotten luck. I didn't care much. She was an ugly-looking mong. Anyway, should have seen the head on her. Dano laughed. Take a bag next time, you'll be right. I think we'll go in, eh? All right. There was a good crowd in the hall by 8, more girls than boys, and Dano remembered them at school. Though many of the girls he had not seen before, he danced with a little redhead up close to her, rubbing her thighs circumspectly, then boldly. He felt the opposition in her body, and she told him to stop that. He laughed and stopped it. He tried it with another tall girl, and she didn't mind, but giggled and blushed and trod all over Dano's feet. He was sitting down on the form, resting them when a bright girl chewing gum dropped down beside him and said, "Lo, Dano, I want you to meet my girlfriend." Dano smiled at the girl, Lucy Chambers, and looked at her friend, a dark-haired girl in green, smiling bashfully and her cheeks dimpling. A small girl, plumpish and ordinary. Dano recognized her. She had come into his sights along with the rest of them, but he had passed her quickly by. She had no attraction for him. She was a dumpy, plain little spud. He said, "Oh yeah, I know you. You're Cassie Dooley. We deal at your old man's store. How are you? I've seen you lots of times in the shop, and your brother too." Dano smiled and nodded and looked about the hall. He turned to Lucy, only to see her flounce off across the floor. Cass Dooley sat down beside him, and he clenched his teeth. She was speaking, and she put her hand on his, and slowly he looked around into her face, her eyes, and his interest wakened for the first time. Hell, he thought, this Sheila's stuck on me. What are you waiting for, Mug? She's ripe, and she likes you. Don't let this chance slip. Not even considering her, and she comes up out of the blue, and you wouldn't have her on your mind, and she gives you that look of affection, and you're crazy to have a girl. What are you waiting for? With an outburst of warmth, he closed his hand on hers, squeezed it, and smiled his affection, and asked her to dance with him. He was the gentleman with her by instinct. He deliberately held her off while they danced, but she snuggled closer, and it sent his blood surging with desire, but he played carefully. Gee, Cass, you're light on your feet, am I? What's that stuff you've got on your hair? It smells beaut. Does things to me. Thanks for the compliment, she said with pleasure, disappointing him, who was eager to have her catch on and make some tempting allusion. They danced 3 dances. Gee, it's hot in here, Cassie, he said, and looked at her significantly, but she was just fanning her face with her handkerchief and looking at the dancers. Why don't we get out in the fresh air for a while and go for a bit of a stroll? She smiled and hooked her arm in his, and they went out into the yard, and Dano, his temples beating, walked her towards the gate. In a dark part, he put his lips on her neck under the ear and kissed her, and then told her he was sorry, and she said nothing but squeezed his hand. She rested her cheek against his shoulder. As they walked, Dano was sweating. His voice trembled. He tried to control it. "It's a funny thing, Cass, but I've only been to these dances 3 times, and each time I saw you there I thought, gee, I'd like to know that Cassie Dooley, but I didn't even have the courage to ask you for a dance. You didn't take much notice of me in that store." "I know I didn't. I was shy. I used to think, gee, next time I go in there, I'll ask that girl if she'll come to the pictures with me, but I just couldn't. Gee, I would have felt a whole lot better if I'd known that." A sober note crept into her voice. "Not that I could have gone anywhere with you. Why? Dad wouldn't let me. He wouldn't let me go anywhere with boys." "Well, what sort of an old bat is he? How old are you?" 16. "Well, I reckon that's terrible, your own father not letting you have any fun. What about your mother?" "Oh, Mom's got no say," Cassie Dooley said, with a slight trace of bitterness. "Gee, he's strict. You've got no idea. I couldn't come to the social if I didn't come with Lucy. I've got to go home with her, too." He was silent, his heart hammering, fearing she'd hear it and that it would betray his thoughts. But hers thoughts were, far away, concerned by her romancing vision and idealizing the feelings in her. "I've been wanting to know you, Dano," she confessed. "At the dances I ached for you to come up and dance with me, and gee, was I disappointed when you didn't. If only you knew how I looked at you. Yeah, you're the best looking boy there." "Well, that's nice to know, Cass, and it's good of you to tell me. I was a real fool to let you pass me by for so long." She stopped and breathed deeply, happily. "We'd better go back now, Dano." "Oh, let's go and sit down in the park for a while and talk. Look, we're right near it. We might as well." "All right, but don't let's be too late getting back. I don't want to miss Lucy." They walked over the soft turf under the sagging trees, and while they were talking he stopped suddenly and grabbed her clumsily to him and kissed her mouth, kissed it breathlessly, panting with the revolution in his being, and he said, "Cassie, you're lovely, you're beautiful." The words came chokingly, shot through with passionate trembling, and he clutched her body tighter, and his hands traced its shape, and he sought her lips and caught them and held his mouth pressed greedily on them. She was a little frightened of him, wanting to yield to his kiss, yet timid under it. He felt her flutter, and he sensed the red signal, and though he wanted to push her down on the ground and take what he wanted, he had enough sense to know she was probably the sort who would lose her head and yell blue murder, and there you'd be in 2 shakes with a copper asking what goes on, and old man Dooley waving a wedding ring and a shotgun. "You've got to keep calm, boy," he said to himself. "Wait for the plate to be passed, don't grab." So he pulled away from her, sat on the seat, put on the strong man having a battle with himself air, with his head in his hands, and after a little wait felt her timorous hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Cass. Dunno what came over me. Guess you went to my head or something." Cassie was silent. She was trembling with shock, not at Dano's exhibition of passion, but that she could have aroused it in him. The deep and very secret pride filled her. It was so secret that not even when she was alone would she admit it to herself, but it was there all the same. She said softly, "That's all right, Dano. I know how you feel." He thought, "Hell," aloud. He said humbly, "I won't do it again, honest. If I can just see you again sometimes, that's all I want." Her heart might have been of sugar, with the hot sun beating on it, the way it melted. "Dano, let's go back." "Okay." She thought, "I wish I was a bad girl, so I wouldn't have to say no to him, to anything." But Dano wouldn't want a bad girl. He took her hand, and they walked out of the park. They didn't talk much, but when in the light he looked at her, He saw the love on her face and put out a hand towards her and took it back, and put the strong man battling look on his face again. Impulsively Cassie squeezed his arm, clinging to him and looking at him with such an expression that he thought, "Come in, Spinner." As the weeks went on, he marveled at himself. A feller could put Bing Crosby out of a job the way he acted. The girl came in as smooth as a fish on a silk line, almost without a struggle. And the funny thing was that the longer he let her dangle, the more he wanted her. She was scared, and she wasn't old enough to hide her fright. "Oh, Danny, I love you, but it's wrong. Not for us, not when I love you so much. And something might happen. Oh, Danny, I'm so frightened." But he came back again with a soft, persuasive voice, full of imploring love, and told her there was nothing to be scared about, and if she really meant what she said about him, she wouldn't think twice about it. She said again she did love him, and because she loved him and wanted to please him, she made the sacrifice. But he didn't awaken her. She thought of the risk, the consequences, but they did not count against the demonstrable joy she gave him. And he was so pleased with her kindness that he thought for a moment he did love her. His lips played like a soft, warm brush over her cool cheek and pressed on her eyelids. She stroked his hair and whispered endearments. And this was ecstasy, to be kissed by the boy you had for so long loved in secret, and despaired of ever knowing, whom you dreamed about and imagined yourself with, escorting you to places, and you so proud to be seen with him, that made the room you lived in seem like a prison, drab and hopeless because he was not with you. But she hadn't wanted it, not really, and even the knowledge that he was happy and that it had all been for him, the sharp pain, the danger, and the terrible fear that already was beginning to lower itself over her life like a dark curtain, could not stop her from weeping a little. "Gee, what's the matter?" "Nothing, Dano, nothing," he said angrily. "You haven't got to kid me. You know, maybe I'm a disappointment to you. Maybe some other joker would have satisfied you better. You don't ever have to see me again if you don't want to." He managed to put enough wistful yearning for denial into the last sentence that the girl forgot all her tears and fears and flung her arms around him, crying, "Oh, Dano, it's you I love, nobody else, and I'd die if I didn't see you again. I'm just crying because I'm happy. I belong to you now, don't you see?" "You bet, Cassie," he said tenderly, thinking, "but I don't belong to you, you silly little biddy. I'm not ever getting tied up, but if I do, it won't be to an apple that falls off the tree before a feller even shakes it." They reached the road leading up past the hall, and he told her she had better go back in by herself, and he'd follow later, so nobody would be suspicious or see them together. 10 to 1 they hadn't been missed, though, but better not to take any risk. He watched her cross the road and disappear. 5 minutes later he casually wandered over, whistling, "I won't be at any social next week, by God. That Sheila's got the nips into me. She must have, or she wouldn't have been so easy. All right to have Sheila's gone on you, but this Dooley piece is serious, and that's no good to me." But he did go the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that, because he wanted her body again, and she fell to his persuasive charm. She felt the urge in herself to please him and keep his love, and they practiced the same stealth, and he had her again. When he came into the yard on the last Thursday, Jimmy Soper came out of the dark, trampling on a lighted butt as he did so, and said, "Hey, Dano, where you been?" Dano pulled up short, just for a walk. He sensed the loss of his secret. "What are you doing out here? You never miss a dance." "I've been looking for you. I'm going home." "But it's not late yet. I feel crook. Got the shivers, sick in the guts." "Well, that might be a good idea. Sounds as if you're getting a cold or something." "Yeah, I got pains in the chest. I got like this before, and I was in bed for a week. I had it when I come tonight. though I'd go away, but it's got worse. Gee, it's a cow when you're having a good time. Hey, I seen you with Cass Dooley over the road. What you do? Put the acid on her. Where was yours? Put the acid on her? God, don't make me laugh. Yeah, that's what I thought. That plain but tatter, I thought. Gee, Dano's hard up. Dano felt peeved, but he didn't show it. He laughed. I was just taking the fresh air, and she came up to me and asked me, did I see Lucy, what's her name? And I said, I think she's still over at the dance, that's all. Put the acid on her, by God, that's good. Jim Soper reeled slightly, put his hand to his pasty brow. Hell, Dano, I think I'm gonna faint. Dano took his arm and led him over to the tank and sat him down on the stand and got water in his cupped hands and put the hands to Jimmy's lips. Bloody nuisance, getting sick now, keeping me away from the dance. Eyes like a shark too, sees everything. Did I have me arm around Dooley? She didn't have her head on me shoulder. We didn't hold hands, did we? Did we? You better nick on home, Jimmy. Wouldn't come along with me, would you, Dano? Feel terrible faint. You'll be all right. You haven't got far to go. Wanting a feller to miss the dance. Hell, a nice turnout. What's the matter with the mug? He helped Jimmy up, and Jimmy walked all right to the gate. And Dano said, you'll be all right. Just go straight for home. And he laughed and said, and don't go looking at Sheila's on the way. I'll see you tomorrow night. Dano went to see Jimmy Soper on Sunday night to see if he was coming to benediction. He saw Jimmy lying on the single bed at the end of the double bed in the small room. The wallpaper was flaking and peeling, and on a strip of it hung down from one corner near the roof. On the bedroom post of the big bed hung clothes. The window was down, and the atmosphere smelt of old clothes. Jimmy Soper pressed his elbows into the bed and raised himself on the pillow as Dano sat down on the bed, and Jimmy said, hell, this is lousy, this being in bed. You're a lucky twerp, having all the fun about the place. I suppose. Struth, don't sit there, Dano. The cold air comes through them cracks like an exhaust pipe. Don't you feel it? Mum puts an umbrella up when it rains in our place. Dano laughed. How you feeling anyway? Not bad. I think I could get up, but Mum won't let me. Want to smoke? You got one in me pocket down there. I'll have one too. Dano ratted through the pockets of Jimmy's trousers, lying over the end of the bed, and put a cigarette to Jimmy's mouth and in his own and lighted them. Jimmy started to cough. He hawked and pulled out from under his pillow a white oatmeal bag with faded blue print on it and placed it to his mouth. I've been spitting blood, you know. Yeah, not much. It's nothing. I spat it before. Always do when I get a cough. He lowered his voice. How are you getting on with the Sheilas? Seen any nice lines lately? Saw a beaut yesterday at the flicks. She give me the eye, and I went over and sat with her near the wall. I'm seeing her tomorrow night. I'm on a promise. Lucky cow. Hey, if you're going to Benno, you better go. I'm not going. Don't think I want to go, do you? Only to please the old girl, that's all. But I'll tell her you were crook and wanted me to keep you company. You had a doctor or anything? Doctor? God, no, I don't need no doctor. I'll be out of this in a week. What do I want a doctor for? Dano laughed. You sound like my old man. Jimmy Soper snickered. Hell, Dano, I had to laugh today. A couple of them welfare workers come. Some old bloke and an old girl, new to us. We get a bit of help from the welfare, you know. Yet they started asking all the questions about the place and getting Mom all het up. The old crumb started bossing her. Why did you have 7 kids if you can't manage? He says. And you could do more to keep your place a little more hygienic or something, he says. One of them jumped up. Jackos, you know. Superior bastards. Yeah, that's right. Well, you should have heard Mum get stuck into 'em. I'm sick of your welfare workers, she says. You prying, long-nosed busybodies. Who are you to ask questions about why I had 7 kids and what's that got to do with it? I got 7 kids, ain't I? And a sick husband, ain't that enough for you? I wouldn't be looking for your bloody charity if I didn't need it. Me and my old man and my kids worked for everything we ever had, and when things get better, we'll do it again. That's what she says. Oh boy, did she let 'em have it. They pulled their horns in, and they asked to see me when they knew I was sick, but Mom wouldn't let 'em, and I was glad. I'd a spat Gaulian fare in that old Nick's eye. Hey, who's smoking cow dung? Oh, good day, Mr. Soper, Dano greeted. It's me, he grinned. I'm on the bumpers again. You'll kill yourself, have one of these. Gee, thanks. That was Soper's genial introduction. He was a tall, spare man with a lean face and deep-set eyes. There was a couple of days' stubble on his chin, and his hair was uncombed. He sat down on the bed, took a deep draw of his cigarette, and let the smoke crawl from his mouth. How's the back, Mr. Soper? Dano asked. Still plays up, Dan. I'm on to a new cure-all. Seems to be doing me some good. But we can only wait and see. Back be damned, Dano thought. Laziness, that's all that's wrong with you. Pull that one out of the bag about your back every time you want a spell from the job. Oh well, that's smart, okay, if you can get away with it. Soper talked genially. How's your father and mother? Here, Johnny's doing all right with the pugging. How is this crook of mine, eh? Putting one over, I think. Heard the one about the bloke at the maternity hospital, pacing up and down, and the nurse coming out and saying, it's a boy, but I've got a surprise for you. And he says, what is it? And she says, but it's black. And he says, oh, that's all right. I worked like a nigger anyway. Dano went to Jimmy's place again on the following Wednesday night about 7. His mother let Dano in, and there was a great silence in the house and in her. Her eyes were wild-looking in a quiet way, and her hair fell in untidy wisps. And he said, what's the matter? Anything up? And she said, Jimmy is bad. And he said, can I see him? And she said, no, don't get up yet. The priest will be here in a minute. Wait till he goes. The priest? Gee, Miss Soper, what's the priest for? Oh, I don't know. I just thought I'd better get someone to have a look at him, and I thought of the priest and sent Teddy up. Maybe I shouldn't have. Where's Mr. Soper? Oh, he ain't home yet. We can guess where he is. Dano sat down, and she asked him if he'd had his tea yet, and he said yes, he had. There was a ring at the door, and she hurried down the hall. Mr. Soper, oh, come in. Father, oh, it isn't Father Ryan. I'm sorry, Father. Dano watched them come out of the dark hall into the light of the dining room. The broad, short priest with the beefy face and no neck, and the crust of iron-gray hair, and no smile on the face, and the gray eyes serious. Dano greeted him politely. Miss Soper half smiled. You must be the new priest. Father Duffy, is it? He had a deep, strong voice, and he said, I started my duties today, Miss Soper, and they booted the old one out, so I must be. She smiled and led him up the stairs to the top room, and he asked if he could go in alone. She came down and looked anxiously at Dano, and a smile trembled on her lips. Seems nice, don't he? Father Duffy wasn't in the room 3 minutes. They heard the door open, his feet clattering down the stairs, saw his eyes flaming as the light struck them, and a furious expression on his face. Dano stared at him and at Miss Soper, and there was a frightened look on her face. Miss Soper, cried the priest, have you had the doctor to the boy? Why, no, I haven't, Father, she trembled. Why haven't you? She faced up to him. Because I don't want them taking no boy of mine to hospital and not being looked after, and he didn't want to go, Jimmy, and he's got well looked after here, better than what they'd do. God forgive you, Miss Soper, that boy's dying. Oh no, she screamed with a shudder. Tuberculosis. Did you know anything about this? Miss Soper started sobbing. Did you? Cried the priest. She nodded, and the priest's face blazed with a passion of rage, and he mentally blasted her for the fool she was, keeping it quiet, exposing your other children to the risk of contagion, and the people beyond this house, and letting that boy rot to death. The woman was crying harshly, sobbing out her piteous excuses. I didn't want him taken away. I had 2 sisters, and they were took away to a sanatorium, and I never seen them again. And I didn't want them taking Jimmy. I didn't want them taking Jimmy. The priest controlled his rage, and he said to her with a face as inflexible as iron, Your boy is dying, Miss Soper, and God pity you, but you, his mother, are responsible. And I am responsible to notify a doctor, but no doctor can save that boy. I'll go back to the church and fetch him the last sacrament. He stormed through the hall and slammed the door, and it was as if a great wind had been there. And Dano, standing stony, looked at the woman collapsing into a chair and sobbing bitterly, and he didn't know what to do but sit down also and think of Jimmy Soper dying, finding the thought too big in its reality for his mind, grappling with it. When Father Duffy returned in 15 minutes, they followed him up the stairs and into the room, and Dano saw the sweating, doughy face of Jimmy, and his eyes following them like the head of a praying mantis, a terror in them. And his lips clapped silently together before the fright of words shot out in a raspy shriek. What's up? What are you doing? What's the priest doing here? Mum, I don't want no priest. And Father Duffy went across and rubbed his hand over Jimmy Soper's hair, brushing it back from the forehead, and Jimmy Soper saw the pikes, and his mouth twisted, his face crumbled, and the horror shone in the fierce glimmers of his eyes. I ain't gonna die, no, I don't want to die. Don't let me die, Mum, don't let me die, I don't want to die, he screamed. And his cough came, and he half choked, and when he settled back he couldn't speak, only make hoarse sounds. But the speech was in his face. The children were crowded in the doorway. Father Duffy told the woman to take them away. She shunted them off and shut the door. Dano didn't look at her face because he couldn't. Jimmy, said Father Duffy softly in his strong voice, You can't speak to me, but you can hear me. You're going to meet your God, Jimmy, the sweetest friend you can ever hope to have. Think over your past sins and repent of them and make an act of contrition. Jimmy Soper struggled in a violent feebleness, his eyes bolting with fear, life desperate in him, and his soundless lips screeching in his terror and his pleas. Father Duffy solemnly gave him conditional absolution, then extreme unction, and Jimmy Soper went on struggling within himself and weakening, and the hemorrhage came, and Dano gaped in horror at the helpless surprise on Jimmy Soper's face, the blood spurting from his wide mouth, running into and out of his ears and nose, and the bed all red, the drips and the candle-white face of Jimmy Soper, and his stillness, and the big red bubble that stayed at his nostril in the stillness, then burst. He heard the terrible emotion of the woman, but he didn't look around. Isle of tears stung his nose like acid. He saw Father Duffy the priest, his mouth working slightly, and the flash of tears in his eyes, and he saw him turn to the woman and say, You poor woman, and Dano went out of the room with a hurried goodbye. He saw the kids sitting still in the dining room, but he didn't say anything to them. He went on down the hall, and he heard a drunken voice singing as he opened the front door, and he saw Soper coming in the front gate, and Soper staggered up the path and hailed him, and sang out, I'm a little prairie flower, but Dano brushed past him and went on out the gate and down the street, and heard himself cursed for a stuck-up mug. He went on down the street, and he thought he never did have any guts. Jimmy Soper was gutless, but he thought, maybe it's different when you're in bed dying and things are different. And he thought, when I die, it won't be like that. It'll be quick, and I won't know anything about it. I'll jump the gap, and I won't know I jumped it. I'll never die like Jimmy Soper. God, no, don't let me die like Jimmy, who knew it and had all the time there was to know it, who was frightened all through him and couldn't talk, and was like someone in a dark room with a lion or a snake, and leaving and no one to go with him out into where he had never been before, a stranger and alone. Don't let me, you great God, don't let me. He wrung his hands till they ached. Emotion filled him with the power of its agony. He cried first in a loud outburst that drew back on its emission. He kept the crying to himself, reining it in when it had the urge of a flooding. Damn! His care against the public place governing him. Then the tears of the tumult ebbed in him. It was silent where he stood on the corner with his feet on the hard asphalt, and the lights of the city before him, glowing and shining upon the good times, the Sheilas and the theaters, the coffee shops and the fun parlors, and the Sheilas, the smell of them doused in scent and powder, their bright lips and eyes, and their breasts and their buttocks, and the blokes layering the grass up there in the Dom, and the sea over there at Manly, and the Sheilas. God, I'll be good. I will live good. I won't slide out of Mass. I'll get up and go every morning. I'll go to confession and Holy Communion, and I won't put anything over my parents. You won't know me from now on. Poor old Jimmy, poor bastard. Hooray, Jimmy, for good, hooray. And he went on crying up the silent street, crying for the sentiment in him, the fear for the great self-pity, the lostness, and that was his prayer for Jimmy Soper.